Meditation 4 of 6 Metaphysical Meditations. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Cassandra Clever. 6 Metaphysical Meditations by René Descartes. Translated by William Molyneux. Of Truth and Falsehood. Meditation 4 of Truth and Falsehood. Of late, it has been so common with me to withdraw my mind from my senses, and I have so thoroughly considered how few things there are appertaining to bodies that are truly perceived, and that there are more things touching man's mind, and yet more concerning God, which are well known, that now without any difficulty I can turn my thoughts from things sensible to those which are only intelligible and abstracted from matter. And truly, I have a much more distinct idea of a man's mind, as it is a thinking thing, having no corporeal dimensions of length, breadth, and thickness, nor having any other corporeal quality, than the idea of any corporeal thing can be. And when I reflect upon myself and consider how that I doubt, that is, am an imperfect dependent being, I from hence collect such a clear and distinct idea of an independent being, which is God, and from hence only that I have such an idea, that is because I that have this idea do myself exist. I do so clearly conclude that God also exists, and that on him my being depends each minute, that I am confident nothing can be known more evidently and certainly by humane understanding. And now I seem to perceive a method by which, from this contemplation of the true God, in whom the treasures of knowledge and wisdom are hidden, I may attain the knowledge of other things. And first, I know 'tis impossible that this God should deceive me, for in all cheating and deceit there is something of imperfection. And though to be able to deceive may seem to be an argument of ingenuity and power, yet without a doubt to have the will of deceiving is a sign of malice and weakness, and therefore is not incident to God. I have also found in myself a judicative faculty, which certainly, as all other things I possess, I have received from God, and seeing he will not deceive me, he has surely given me such a judgment that I can never err, whilst I make right use of it. Of which truth I can make no doubt, unless it seems that from hence it will follow, that therefore I can never err, for if whatever I have from God, and if he gave me no faculty of erring, I may seem not to be able to err. And truly, so it is whilst I think upon God, and wholly convert myself to the consideration of him, I find no occasion of error or deceit. But yet, when I return to the contemplation of myself, I find myself liable to innumerable errors, inquiring into the cause of which I find in myself an idea, not only a real and positive one of a God, that is, of a being infinitely perfect, but also, as I may so speak, a negative idea of nothing. That is to say, I am so constituted between God and nothing, or between a perfect being and no being, that as I am created by the highest being, I have nothing in me by which I may be deceived or drawn into error. But as I partake in a manner of nothing, or of a no being, that is, as I myself am not the highest being, and I want many perfections, 'tis no wonder that I should be deceived. By which I understand that error, as it is error, is not any real being dependent on God, but it is only a defect. And that therefore to make me err, there is no requisite a faculty of erring given to me by God, but only it so happens that I err merely because the judicative faculty which he has given me is not infinite. But yet, this account is not fully satisfactory, for error is not only a mere negation, but 'tis a privation, or a want of a certain knowledge, which ought, as it were, to be in me. And when I consider the nature of God, it seems impossible that he should give me any faculty which is not perfect in its kind, or which should want any of its due perfections. For if by how much the more skilful the workman is, by so much the perfecter works proceed from him, what can be made by the great Maker of all things which is not fully perfect? For I cannot doubt but God may create me so that I may never be deceived. Neither can I doubt but that he wills whatever is best. Is it therefore better for me to be deceived or not to be deceived? These things, when I consider more heedfully, it comes into my mind, first, that 'tis no cause of admiration that God should do things whereof I can give no account, nor must I therefore doubt his being, because there are many things done by him, and I not comprehend why or how they are done. For seeing I now know that my nature is very weak and finite, and that the nature of God is immense, incomprehensible, infinite, from hence I must fully understand that he can do numberless things, that causes whereof lie hidden to me, upon which account I only esteem all those causes which are drawn from the end, viz. Final causes, as of no use in natural philosophy. For I cannot without rashness think myself able to discover God's designs. I perceive this also, that whenever we endeavor to know whether the works of God are perfect, we must not respect any other kind of creature singly, but the whole universe of beings. For perhaps what, if I considered alone, may deservedly seem imperfect, yet as it is a part of the world, is most perfect. And though, since I have doubted of all things, I have discovered nothing certainly to exist but myself and God, yet, since I have considered the omnipotency of God, I cannot deny but that many other things are made, or at least may be made by him, so that I myself may be a part of this universe. Furthermore, coming nigher to myself, and inquiring what these errors of mine are, which are the only arguments of my imperfection, I find them to depend on two concurring causes, on my faculty of knowing, and on my faculty of choosing or freedom of my will. That is to say, from my understanding and my will together. For by my understanding alone I can only perceive ideas, whereon I make judgments, wherein, precisely so taken, there can be no error, properly so called. For though, perhaps, there may be numberless things whose ideas I have not in me, yet I am not properly to be said deprived of them, but only negatively wanting them. And I cannot prove that God ought to have given me a greater faculty of knowing, and though I understand him to be a skilful workman, yet I cannot think that he ought to have put all those perfections in each work of his singly, with which he might have endowed some of them. Neither can I complain that God has not given me a will or freedom of choice, large and perfect enough, for I have experienced that 'tis circumscribed by no bounds. And 'tis worth our taking notice that I have no other thing in me so perfect and so great, but I understand that there may be perfecter and greater. For if, for example, I consider the faculty of understanding, I presently perceive that in me 'tis very small and finite, and also at the same time I form to myself an idea of another understanding, not only much greater, but the greatest and infinite, which I perceive to belong to God. In the same manner, if I inquire into memory or imagination for any other faculties, I find them in myself weak and circumscribed. But in God I understand them to be infinite. There is therefore only my will or freedom of choice, which I find to be so great, that I cannot frame to myself an idea of one greater, so that 'tis by this chiefly by which I understand myself to bear the likeness and image of God. For though the will of God be without comparison greater than mine, both in the knowledge and power which are joined therewithin, which make it more strong and effective, and also as to the object thereof, for God can apply himself to more things than I can. Yet being taken formally and precisely, God's will seems no greater than mine. For the freedom of will consists only in this, that we can do or not do such a thing, that is, affirm or deny, prosecute or avoid, or rather in this only, that we are so carried to a thing which is proposed by our intellect to affirm or deny, prosecute or shun, that we are sensible, that we are not determined to the choice or aversion thereof by any outward force. Neither is it requisite to make one free that he should have an inclination to both sides. For, on the contrary, by how much the more strongly I am inclined to one side, whether it be that I evidently perceive therein good or evil, or whether it be that God has so disposed my inward thoughts, by so much the more free I am in my choice. Neither truly do God's grace or natural knowledge take away from my liberty, but rather increase and strengthen it. For the indifference which I find in myself, when no reason inclines me more to one side than the other, is the meanest sort of liberty, and is so far from the sign of perfection, that it only argues a defect or negation of knowledge. For if I should always clearly see what were true and good, I should never deliberate in my judgment or choice, and consequently, though I were perfectly free, yet I should never be indifferent. From all which I perceive that neither the power of willing precisely so taken, which I have from God, is the cause of my errors, it being most full and perfect in its kind, neither also the power of understanding. For whatever I understand, since 'tis from God that I understand it, I understand aright, nor can I be therein deceived. From whence therefore proceed all my errors? To which I answer that they proceed from hence only, that seeing the will expiates itself farther than the understanding, I keep it not within the same bounds of my understanding, but often extend it to those things which I understand not, to which things it being indifferent, it easily declines from what is true and good, and consequently I am deceived and commit sin. Thus, for example, when lately I felt myself to inquire whether anything doth exist, and found that from setting myself to examine such a thing, it evidently follows that I myself exist, I could not but judge what I so clearly understood to be true. Not that I was forced thereto by an outward impulse, but because a strong propension in my will did follow this great light in my understanding, so that I believed it so much the more freely and willingly, by how much the less indifferent I was thereto. But now I understand not only that I exist as I am a thing that thinks, but I also meet with a certain idea of corporeal nature, and it so happens that I doubt whether that thinking nature that is in me be different from that corporeal nature, or whether they are both the same. But in this I suppose that I have found no argument to incline me either ways, and therefore I am indifferent to affirm or deny either, or to judge nothing of either. But this indifferency extends itself not only to those things of which I am clearly ignorant, but generally to all those things which are not so very evidently known to me at this time when my will deliberates of them. For though never so probable guesses incline me to one side, yet the knowing that they are only conjectures and not indubitable reasons is enough to draw my assent to the contrary part, which lately I have sufficiently experienced, when I am supposed all those things which formerly I assented to as most true, as very false. For this reason only I have found myself able to doubt of them in some manner. If I abstain from passing my judgment when I do not clearly and distinctly enough perceive what is truth, 'tis evident that I do well, and that I am not deceived. But if I affirm or deny, then 'tis that I abuse the freedom of my will, and if I turn myself to that part which is false, I am deceived. But if I embrace the contrary part, 'tis but by chance that I light on the truth. Yet I shall not therefore be blameless, for 'tis manifest by the light of nature that the perception of the understanding ought to precede the determination of the will. And 'tis in this abuse of free will that the privation consists, which constitutes error. I say there is a privation in the action as it proceeds from me, but not in the faculty which I have received from God, nor in the action as it depends on him. Neither have I any reason to complain that God has not given me a larger intellective faculty or more natural light, for 'tis a necessary incident to a finite understanding that it should not understand all things, and 'tis incident to a created understanding to be finite. And I have more reason to thank him for what he has bestowed upon me, though he owed me nothing, than to think myself robbed by him of those things which he never gave me. Nor have I reason to complain that he has given me a will larger than my understanding, for seeing the will consists in one thing only, and as it were an indivisible, viz. To will or not to will, it seems contrary to its nature that it should be less than 'tis, and certainly by how much more the greater it is, so much the more thankful I ought to be to him that gave it to me. Neither can I complain that God concurs with me in the production of those voluntary actions or judgments in which I am deceived. For those acts, as they depend on God, are altogether true and good, and I am in some measure more perfect in that I can so act than if I could not. For that privation, in which the ratio finalis of falsehood and sin consists, wants not the concourse of God. For it is not a thing, and having respect to him as its cause ought not to be called privation, but negation. For certainly 'tis no imperfection in God that he has given me a freedom of assenting or not assenting to some things, the clear and distinct knowledge whereof he has not imparted to my understanding. But certainly 'tis an imperfection in me that I abuse this liberty, and pass my judgment on those things which I do not rightly understand. Yet I see that 'tis possible with God to effect that, though I should remain free and of a finite knowledge, I should never err, that is, if he had endowed my understanding with the clear and distinct knowledge of all things whereof I should ever have an occasion of deliberating. Or if he had only so firmly fixed in my mind that I should never forget this, that I must never judge of a thing which I do not clearly and distinctly understand, either of which things had God done, I easily perceive that I, as considered in myself, should be more perfect than now I am. Yet, nevertheless, I cannot deny but that there may be a greater perfection in the whole universe of things, for that some of its parts are obnoxious to errors, and some not, than if they were all alike. And I have no reason to complain that it has pleased God that I should act on the stage of this world a part not the chief and most perfect of all, or that I should not be able to abstain from error in the first way above specified, which all depends upon the evident knowledge of those things whereof I deliberate. Yet that I may abstain from error by the other means above mentioned, which depends only on this, that I judge not of anything, the truth whereof is not evident. For though I have experienced in myself this infirmity, that I cannot always be intent upon one and the same knowledge, yet I may by a continued and often repeated meditation bring this to pass, that as often as I have use of this rule I may remember it, by which means I may get, as it were, an habit of not erring, in which thing seeing the greatest and chief perfection of man consists. I repute myself to have gained much by this day's meditation, for that therein I have discovered the cause of error and falsehood, which certainly can be no other than what I have now declared. For whenever in passing my judgment I bridle my will, so that it extend itself only to those things which I clearly and distinctly perceive, it is impossible that I can err. For doubtless all clear and distinct perception is something, and therefore cannot proceed from nothing, but must necessarily have God for its author. God, I say, who is infinitely perfect and who cannot deceive, and therefore it must be true. Nor have I this day learned only what I must beware of, that I be not deceived, but also what I must do to discover truth, for that I shall certainly find, if I fully apply myself to those things only which I perfectly understand, and if I distinguish between those and what I apprehend, but confusedly and obscuredly, both which hereafter I shall endeavour. End of Meditation 4.